break for a month in Melbourne, cheering for the Ashes at the Boxing Day Test match. So, Nick, you'll have to give me some tips as we go along and as we get into this topic. But we're gathered here today to talk about something super interesting. Lots of work going on. We have great panelists with us, but it's around livestock and livestock emissions and how livestock is getting better, where the investments are coming from, where the innovation is coming from. Everything from community-based innovation when it comes to feed to high-tech innovation when it comes to methane and reduction of methane. So this is going to be a fascinating discussion. So without further ado, I would love to get each one of you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey, then your role, what you do, how it connects to the topic, and then we'll get into a little bit of substantive work. So maybe Nick, if you can kick us off, and we'll just go around.
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Nick Blong. I'm from the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, Australian Government. So great to be with you this morning. So my role in the department is looking after sustainability and climate policy and programs in the department. So quite an extensive body of work around soils measurement, greenhouse gas accounting in agriculture, climate smart agriculture programs, and working with industry to sort of support low emissions food and fibre production in Australia.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Nick. Marcela?
Hello everyone, I'm Marcela Quintero. I'm the Director of Research of the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT. Those are two CGIAR centers that came together into one single organization 5 years ago. And we work on sustainable livestock and climate action, among other topics. And then I'm going to be talking more about those two things and how it relates to the topic today. Thank you.
Thanks. Enrique, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Henrique Bezerra. I'm the regional lead for Latin America at the Global Methane Hub. The Global Methane Hub is a philanthropic organization that supports countries and communities who are aligned with the goals of lowering methane emissions by 30% by 2030 from 2020 levels based on the Global Methane Pledge Agreement on Glasgow, on COP26. And in agriculture, of course, we support both livestock production and rice production to come up with new technologies, and as we're going to talk more here, digital tools to allow farmers to have the necessary data so they can have a better management of their production systems, increasing their productivity, but also lowering the methane intensity of their production.
Fantastic. And I'm going to stick with you because you have a global view. You folks are investing in quite a few innovations. Give us a sense of what's got you excited in terms of Latin America, in terms of the innovation. Set the stage for us from your perspective and from your global view.
Great. So in terms of innovation, we have two key accelerators. One is the enteric fermentation accelerator, which exists for more than 2 years now. And just on the 7th of November, we announced the rice methane accelerator. What these accelerators do, they are focused on innovation, and they are trying to nurture new technologies, better MRV systems that as of now still have a high cost, so that we can lower the cost of implementation of these technologies. So that, as I said, we increase productivity. The focus is always on productivity because we know that if you don't improve farmers' livelihoods, this is not going to be implemented. And so the accelerators focus more on the innovation part of things. And then we have the policy, advocacy, awareness part of our work, which focus on the win-wins, which are not necessarily innovations per se, but are these practices, these existing practices that will increase farmers' productivity, for instance, animal health, choosing better genetics for the animals, better breeding for the animals, improving dietary and pasture management. So all of those things that are not necessarily innovation, but we provide tools that facilitate that better management so you'll have more productivity and lower methane emissions. That's what we call win-win. And in Latin America, that's what in Africa and in Asia, the global south, it's where we are focusing on this more win-win approach. And the innovation approach, it includes, of course, the global south. We have the example that you're going to talk more about in Latin America and other research organizations. But mainly thinking of how they're going to implement in the ground with different weather, with different social contexts, these type of technologies and practices to reduce methane emissions.
Fantastic. I think one thing that resonates with me is, farmers won't do green if they are red. And so I think that's a fantastic. Talking about farmers, Paul has just joined us, and maybe Paul, if you can give us a quick introduction of, your journey, the role in your organization, a little bit about your organization, that'll be awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Zimbabwe Farmers Union is a membership-based organization, largely representing smallholder farmers. And we have a membership of upwards of 365,000 farmers. And these are real grassroots people. And most of them obviously would not even know that there is a COP going on in Brazil. And yet they are affected by the world phenomenon of climate change. Now, focusing on the business of the day, we see that there is a lot that is happening, but in small pockets, in terms of trying to mitigate, to adapt, but then focusing on livestock in particular, the two interventions that we are looking at and focusing at right now. In Zimbabwe, we are doing a lot of piloting, and it is, I'm sure it's the world over, particularly in the third world countries, because of funding issues. Piloting on the digital platforms, piloting also on the nature-based practices. But these are just small pockets. And the results are very encouraging, but then upscaling is also a very big issue when it comes to what do we do in order for us to then gain traction and then bring the actual result that can change lives. So yeah, we are in there, and we have been piloting these two interventions in the southern parts of the country. If you appreciate the geography, that is in the Matabeleland provinces, Mat North and Mat South, and working with around 4,500 farmers and covering an area of around 25,000 hectares, and also focusing in particular on cattle and goats, and bringing in innovations that can help transform the lives of these people who are largely in the arid areas of the country. So to the south of the country is very dry, and many livelihoods are actually at risk in those areas.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul, for kind of giving us setting a picture for us in terms of some of the work you're doing. I'd like to come back to you in terms of what are some of those interventions that are working as we go through this discussion. But just over to Marcella, then, from your perspective, Marcella, the Alliance has done a lot of work on forages, and I know that that is a big area of focus when it comes to diets and how and what livestock consume as a huge lever for change. Can you give us a sense of what some of that work has been, and what are some of the results you are seeing?
So thank you, Sid. I would like first to start that we hold the largest collection of forages in Future Seeds. Future Seeds is the most modern seed bank in the CGIAR. And then we have a mandate that is not only to conserve that agrobiodiversity, but also to explore it and see how it can be used for nutrition, for food security, and for the environment. So we started a journey to discover how we can unlock the potential of that diversity in our seed bank to contribute to reduce emissions. And there we have two strategies. We are analyzing different forages accessions that we have that have the capacity to develop deep roots in the soil, and that can help to increase the soil organic carbon through those deep rooting mechanisms. And the other part of the strategy to reduce emissions is to find forages that have antimethanogenic compounds, basically that can help to reduce methane emissions from enteric fermentation. So for that, we also established, with the support also of philanthropy, the largest facility in Latin America to measure enteric fermentations in respiratory chambers And where we are testing there different type of diets with those forages to see which one can help us to reduce methane emissions from enteric fermentation. So this is part of an holistic approach that you have for low-emission livestock systems, so incorporating more carbon, reducing methane emissions, and now we are combining this as well with MRV systems and digital advisory tools that can also inform how to better manage grazing that can also render more benefits on the ground in the farms.
Fantastic, and I think you're setting this up and making my job a little easy here, because now we've heard from what is happening on the ground in small scale holders in Zimbabwe. We've heard something in terms of technology, in terms of forages. So Nick, over to you. You know, as the policy guy and the policy shop, and especially when it comes to MRV, there always tends to be a bit of a, we don't have a standardized way of measuring. So how are you looking at it from a policy perspective to incentivize farmers through an MRV system? What's been some of the wins? What's been some of the challenges? Maybe you can give us a perspective.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are no easy wins here and no silver bullets in low emissions food and fibre production, including in the livestock sector. So I think it's really exciting to hear like all the R&D that's going into opportunities to reduce emissions from the livestock sector around the world. And while production systems will vary enormously across the world, whether it's in Zimbabwe or here in Brazil or in Australia, the challenge is how you encourage livestock producers to think about their emissions profile on farm and understand what steps they can take over time to reduce the emissions intensity of their production. Now, in Australia, from a policy perspective, I guess there are sort of a handful of sort of underpinning policy priorities that we're focusing on. First and foremost is around know your number. So what we can do to help farmers understand their emissions profile in their business, which is easier said than done. And it's an ongoing sort of journey in Australia, but certainly providing confidence for producers to look at measuring their on-farm emissions, understanding how that it can be incorporated into their business as usual farm decision-making processes, and also understanding what type of activities might reduce that emissions profile over time. Now, there are some exciting technologies on the horizon, but the trick is how they become commercially viable, and also how they support farm productivity, profitability and sustainability. Because at the end of the day, they're the things that will encourage and incentivise practice change on farm. It needs to provide sort of a bottom line impact. It can't just be around emissions. It's got to be commercially viable. It's got to be able to be adopted at scale. And it's got to have a productivity sort of impact as well, because that will really what will drive uptake and change at scale. So a lot of the policy priorities are focused on those types of issues rather than sort of a one-size-fits-all approach, because as we've heard, the challenges of producing food and fibre around the world, it's very diverse production systems. Even within Australia, different commodities, different regions, different soil types, different climate zones, they all require different solutions and different approaches and different farm scales as well. Some farm businesses are better equipped to adopt practice change at scale quickly. Others take time, because it all is all about managing risk. And you've got to do all that while adapting to climate change. There'll be droughts and other kind of seasonal impacts or commodity price shocks, which all drive business decisions on farm. So from Australia's perspective, it's how you sort of integrate emissions measurement and practice change over time into BAU farm management decisions.
I love the focus on know your numbers. As an engineer, it makes me feel quite, pragmatic in terms of, hey, let's set a number on your farm and then let's give you the tools to reduce it. I've had a chance to speak to livestock farmers over the last 6 months, from San Diego to Kansas to Canada and Olds to Australia, and now also in Africa. One thing that I think I've heard from them is the cost to measure and the transition cost always is a challenge, because there isn't enough money in the P&L to just say, hey, I have enough margin, I'm going to fund all of this. That isn't there until they get better value, a better market, or for a price for their reduction of the emissions. So from a, and I'll stick with you, Nick, and maybe we go this way. You know, how do we incentivize farmers? How do we get them to give the transition finance they need or find room in the P&L to be able to do that?
Yeah, again, no easy solution, but I think from our perspective, we are increasingly viewing emissions intensity of production on a farm business as a proxy for overall farm business health and sustainability. So not just using emissions as an indicator of greenhouse gas alone, but thinking about it from the perspective of productivity, sustainability, farm business resilience, and a proxy for a whole bunch of other farm performance indicators that every farmer cares about. So I think you need to, we're increasingly seeing a need to integrate this emissions task and challenge into a BAU business opportunity for farmers. And that will, I think, provide that bigger perspective around farm business performance and decision making, because farmers are making decisions every day on farm that impacts their sort of medium and long term sort of profitability. And if we're only looking at this task through an emissions perspective, I think we will not target enough producers to make change because of that P&L challenge. Many farmers are really sort of, you know, they're exposed to global markets and very complex changing global food supply chains. So they're dealing with risk every single day. And we need to de-risk the emissions conversation with them and think about how it flows through to other farm business decisions that they will make, go beyond emissions.
I think that's a powerful message that I haven't heard enough, or probably not, is that emissions, you're seeing a lot of lower emissions tied to better business outcomes and higher emissions tied to lower. And that's a case study that I think Australia should continue to share. I think saying on the sharing stories, I think Marcela, you know, your organization works in collaboration with several actors to scale solutions, especially private sector. Where are you seeing some of those things work? What are some of the challenges to scale solutions? Australia obviously is blessed with, you know, as a global north country with lots of tools, but you work quite a bit with global south. What's the, you know, how do you scale it from that perspective?
No, that's an important one, and also building on what you said, I think for the scaling, it's not enough to say, oh, this is going to reduce emissions, because this is not the driver of many decisions at the end on how you manage your animals and your land. So that's why I was saying that we have an approach that is more holistic, in the sense that it's not only putting the forages that reduce methane or that incorporate more carbon in the soil, but how we combine this with the right management practices to, for example, increase the carrying capacity. So the number of animals per hectare, that has been an issue in some areas like in Brazil or in the savannas of Colombia, where the grazing has been very extensive. So if you start showing that potential as well, that you can reduce the amount of land that you use, but with more animals, then it's already something that is attractive for many farmers. The other one is how we increase emission intensity, basically by improving the productivity of milk or of meat. And then, and the other one is, and our role as science is to provide that evidence and say, yes, you increase here or not, or you have here an opportunity to increase more, to improve the diet, so you improve better also the milk productivity, just to say something. But then the other part that we are learning in Colombia is to bring the private sector. There is private sector interested in making livestock sustainable, but also, of course, profitable. And then they are investing a lot as well in the operation. So they have found that somehow the science that we are doing also help them to make a better business case of their investment. And they are interested, for example, in the carbon markets, not because they are in the market, in the business of carbon market, but it's because it makes their business model also more attractive. But productivity is first, always for them. So, but we are now unlocking the investment of private sector to unlock the move, the transfer of capital in these areas to promote sustainable livestock. So it's something we are working more and more, so we don't rely only on governments, we don't rely only on public development sector, but also on the private sector that are also interested in making these investments in livestock, in the livestock sector, in countries like Colombia and Brazil, where it's an important agricultural sector.
I think this is fascinating, giving farmers a market to be able to value add their business, which is the carbon that they will value add, is a great way to incentivize the right practices that generates better carbon credits. And I think one thing that I think I want to go to Henrique is around how do you build the transition finance? You know, I know you're building all of these accelerators, you have innovations coming along, but I always say, where is the money, right? And nowadays, money is not just philanthropic money. It has to be blended finance. There needs to be different types of instruments really helping through that journey. What are you seeing in terms of scaling? Where is some of that finance coming through? Give us some sense on how is the money coming along?
Yeah, I think that's a key issue we need to address, right? And I think, as Marcela was saying, this is not just about MRV, and this is not just about what farmers will do. We also need to make sure that the value chain is committed. So it's very important that companies and corporations in the food system, they have commitments and they are involved in these solutions, be it through carbon markets or net zero commitments. So we need the value chain, the companies, the big corporations to commit to buying low methane meat, low methane dairy. This is a key part, and it's also talk about finance. Where will the money come from? The money should also come from public policy, because in the end of the day, this is a common good. This is about farmers' livelihood, but this is also about climate change. This is about food security. And so we need policies like those we have in Brazil that could and should be improved, like the low carbon agriculture plus policy and the Safra plan, which basically subsidizes credit and insurance for sustainable practices in the farm. We need more of those policies, and we need them to be tagged to methane mitigation practices in the farm. And of course, we need the financial sector per se, right? So I mentioned Plano Safra, which is a subsidy but directed to credit and to insurance. That's an example linked to a public policy. We also need multilateral development banks to be engaged in this agenda. So at the Global Methane Hub, as a philanthropy, we partner with IFAD and with the World Bank so that they can look at their agriculture development portfolios and what we call demethanize it. So make sure that in their portfolios, in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America, they provide incentives for public policy to prioritize methane mitigation in these schemes that will be good for farmers, but will be good for the climate. So we usually, for each dollar that we donate, they come with $100 or $1,000. So it really catalyzes that level of investment. But really, we need to think and we need to come up with financial mechanisms so that the private sector will come with the big bucks, right? And that's why it's so important that we understand where emissions are, understand what are the best practices that will mitigate these emissions, so we create markets and other financial mechanisms to bring the money where it's most needed.
I think I've heard quite a bit on insurance. You know, farmers don't want to take risk, and they are in a very risky business to begin with. Right? So many variables, and so the cost of insurance always becomes a challenge. And so having policies that allow you to subsidize or de-risk some of that practices is a way to really scale up some of this. This is a great group because we often talk about farmers without having farmer representation. So I want to go to Paul now. You've heard all three of them talk about all the things they want to do for farmers. You have lots of small scale, smallholder farmers, maybe, two cows, 3 cows, 4 livestock, depends on the size. What have you heard today from our speakers that have resonated with you, saying, "Oh yeah, this will work, that won't work. This will work, that won't work." Because ultimately, it has to be with you. Give us a sense of what you've heard that has resonated with you.
Yeah, so what comes out clearly...
And if you don't mind just holding the mic a little bit close, yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
So what comes out clearly is that there is need to take action. Everything happens on the farm. And if the farmers do not take any action at all, there's going to be a crisis. So all the interventions that are coming have to find a way, at least to go through the farmer's head. And the farmer must understand that if I don't do this, then I'm out of business. First and foremost, farmers are business people, and they are being affected by all these changes that are taking place. And by the way, farmers have been innovating on their own. They've been trying out things, especially where things don't work. They have been trying out things on their own experiments. So it's not like they're just waiting for somebody who's got solutions to come and say, so where are the problems? They have been doing something, but there are limitations to this whole thing. There are certain barriers that we need to understand. For instance, trust. Trust is a big issue. Just trusting a solution which is coming from outside your farm. That's a huge barrier on its own. And there is also the issue of cost that you mentioned earlier. When we were talking about digital platforms, and digital platforms depend on connectivity, internet, and the rest of that. So the cost and connectivity itself is actually a barrier that is preventing our farmers from either accessing or using some of these solutions that we see. And we have noticed that some solutions remain research-based, very scientific and useful, but too academic for the farmer to adopt. So a farmer is not a student in university. A farmer is actually doing things practically. So the farmer needs practical solutions that are science-based. So in other words, the research findings must be packaged to the readership and the level of the farmer so that these things work. So we really need to do a lot of things coming off the books, coming off documents that have been written, to things that are practical, making our hands dirty and also being accepted and being trusted by the farmers so that these solutions, they take root. So it is quite a lot of things, and I totally agree, coming out of the pilots that we have been doing, introducing forages, new forages. I mean, we have new grasses that we didn't know about, the lab, the lucerne and everything. And farmers have largely, in these pilots, they have largely accepted. So the reception is there. But what we now need to do is bring in all these other things about acceptability and also appreciate that farmers want to make money. At the end of the day, they are just not out there to fix the climate. They want to make money. And if the climate can be fixed in the process, so be it.
Paul, you remind me of my grandfather and father, both farmers. And so when you talk, I almost feel like, I'm listening to some of what they say. Trust a solution is a big barrier. Cost of a solution is a barrier. Small things like digital connectivity for technology solutions in many parts of the world still remains low tech, 2G, 3G networks. And then, converting science to more practical solutions. And then farmers want to make money. That is a fantastic list for those who are in the business of trying to get to farmers to adopt some of these things to think about. I want to stick with you. You started this conversation by saying there are a couple of pilots, some things are working. Could you share a little bit about what is working? You mentioned there was a couple of pilots being done by around 4,500 farmers in smallholders in the south. Give us a sense of what is working. Paint the picture for us a bit.
So what is working is we have digital platforms that have been introduced. I'm just trying to pick my stuff here. So for animal identification, for instance, just to know where your animal is, what your animal is doing at whatever point in time, we have rolled that out in the pilots. We are also doing remote sensing and GIS. So in other words, to help us map forage availability, that is a very critical thing. You need to know and plan the grazing and then prevent land degradation. This is one other thing. And then the mobile head management apps. These are the ones that I'm talking about, which require a lot in terms of connectivity, the gadgets, which cost quite a bit. Then moving on to the nature-based is also the silvopastoral systems, right? Integrating trees, the shrubs, and into grazing lands, increasing soil carbon, okay, and also providing shade for productivity and improving fodder quality. And also the improved forages, yeah, and legumes. Then the rotational grazing and better manure management. These are some of the things that we have actually seen shooting out straight from the pilots that we are doing in those two areas that I mentioned earlier on. But upscaling, taking this up, it's not just money. It is also a lot in terms of knowledge. By the way, knowledge is also another barrier. And sometimes someone can resist something purely because they don't know it. So knowledge is actually very critical when it comes to this. So these are some of the things that we are practically doing on the ground. And unfortunately, the pilot is coming to an end this December. And there are no prospects of us taking it further. And yet, we have an animal head in terms of cattle only. We are talking of about 5.3 million, animals. And we're only covering just a little bit in this pilot. And that's actually not too good, a situation. The prospects are good. Farmers in the area, they have accepted. And they are willing also to spend money to make sure that these things continue. But we need a huge intervention in terms of bringing the concepts to the people, training the farmers, and ensuring that the farmers appreciate the changes that they themselves have been experimenting on in their own rudimentary ways.
I think this is a great segue into trying to wrap this panel up with each one of you sharing what has come out of your innovations, what is working and where it is in its scaling. And I know, maybe Henrique, you can give us a sense of what is coming out of the accelerators that you are seeing a lot of excitement around. I saw a company just got $20 million in Chicago invested because now they have a feed additive that doesn't add too much cost, but is able to reduce emissions by 20%. And so that is a big success story. But in terms of what you are seeing from your perspective, can you give us a sense?
Sure. So what we're seeing, as you mentioned some examples, we have a big variety of products like feed additives that are being now tested. Some are already in the market. So this is not necessarily an innovation per se. The innovation would be making sure that this is cost effective and that the actual methane mitigation is there to its maximum. We have a number of initiatives. I don't have one to pick and give to you. I'm from the energy sector. I'm representing the agriculture team here. But the challenge, especially when we're talking about global south countries, it's, as I was mentioning before, not necessarily like the most innovative, fancy technology, which of course it's a focus, especially for developed countries. We're also, besides feed additives, we're talking about vaccines that will act on the biome and the stomachs to make sure that the animal digests that. Because if you think of methane emissions in enteric fermentation, that's a lack of energy efficiency in the digestive system. The animal is missing that energy. That could be meat, but it's becoming methane. So we're also investing in that, in animal health, in genetics, making sure that for each biome, for each climate, we know which individuals are the ones who are more productive to farmers, but also that they emit methane, that they mitigate methane, they emit less methane emissions. And for that, you need the MRV, you need to test. So this is the more innovative work that the enteric fermentation accelerator is doing all over the world. But then really, when you think of Global South, we believe that the bigger potential for mitigation is in win-win practices. So it's not necessarily in the accelerator part of the equation. It's more on these practices that will improve grazing systems by providing data to farmers so they know where the grass is more nutritious, which kind of forage grows better in their environment, and this kind of technologies, like for instance in animal health, providing farmers the capacity to combat mastitis, because this is a big issue in dairy farms in the Global South. So these are the type of things that will lower methane intensity in these production systems.
Fascinating. Marcella, from your perspective, forages, we've heard from Paul also in terms of different legumes. A lot of forages also have to be native to those ecosystems. What are some of the results you are seeing from the forage in terms of the impact of reduction? I know you are measuring, once they eat certain forages, the diet changes, then you measure. Where is some of that? What are some of the results you are seeing on it?
Yeah. So I think, we have been measuring what are the changes in the emission intensity with, for example, improved forages that increase the digestibility, the productivity, but we also reduce then the emission intensity and incorporate more carbon in the soil. So after we did all the life cycle analysis and the carbon footprint, we have seen that we can reduce the intensity of the emissions by 20-40% compared with the baseline in an area of Colombia. But I just want to keep emphasizing that at the end, what is also making the system work is that it's a combination of different things together, right? So the improved forages also, and thank you for mentioning, they are also interested in shrubs and trees that can be used as forage, but at the same time can provide benefits for the animal welfare. And then the good selective animal breeding, like also having better animals that can use also better feed, and a strong community engagement. And here I want also to make an emphasis on the role of the farmers that are large-scale farmers and have risk capital. And those are the ones that try first at technology, right? Because have risk capital. But when you have those trying something and the others seeing that this is working, they are more prone to replicate and to copy, because if it works for this person that have probably more access to knowledge and technology and capital, it has to be working. So that has been also a good strategy, and it's basic adoption theory. You know that there are always few that try. You need to identify who are those able to try, because it requires an investment. And when it's working, the others start also, somehow also trying and adopting, hopefully in the long term. So I think it's a combination of all that strategy that is making things work. And our work is more to provide the evidence, the facts, and give them the numbers also to improve their business case.
The community piece is so important here, because even from what I know, the larger farmer tries something and then they are successful, then all the small farmers say, okay, he did it or they did it. And that trust and that community is so important when you want to scale some of this. Nick, you get the last kind of wrap up words. You've heard from quite a diverse set of views. Australia is a leading livestock ecosystem. I've seen Aussie beef in Cambodia and Malaysia, but also have had a chance to talk to Sue, who is a livestock beef farmer. Where there are two parts to my question. One is, there's a lot of investment and innovation happening in Australia that is working. how do you share that with the rest of the world in your capacity as one of the leading ecosystems? And then second is, how do you continue to move fast in your own ecosystem? So it's a two-pronged question,
Yeah.
and the last word with you.
Yeah, thanks. So I think like research and development collaboration is going to be really important. So while, Australia, we are fortunate to have, on the whole, very efficient sort of farming systems across our livestock industries, we still confront the same challenge around how you reduce emissions over time. And so all the research and development technologies and practices that we've heard about this morning of great interest to Australia. We have, very strong research and science institutions in Australia, but they alone aren't going to sort of solve this for Australia. So collaboration across countries is going to be really important, I think. And things like feed supplements is a good example where obviously there's a lot of exciting work and a lot of products in the market at the moment going through various trials. But in Australia, we have very extensive livestock systems. We don't really have an intensive livestock system in Australia, particularly in the red meat sector. So how do you have feed supplements that can be used in our extensive feedstock systems, so livestock systems, and that's an existential sort of challenge for this type of science. It's exciting that it's on the horizon, but then it's one thing to be able to sort of provide feed supplements to livestock in feedlots, but how do you provide them to animals that are on large, 10,000 hectares of agricultural land that may only see a human, once in a while. So it's a completely different, be one piece of technology that solves this, even in livestock. It's going to be a stacked technology approach. And that's going to be viable for different farmers in different ways. So I think going to your first question, it's going to be around sort of collaboration, sharing experiences and technical capabilities across borders is going to be really important. Sharing lessons, sharing failures across boundaries is going to be really important too. And I think also, perhaps sort of segueing to the second part of your question, like what we are seeing in Australia is just more and more interest from farmers around what the opportunities might be. They may not be an easy solution for them right now, but they're certainly starting to take more of an interest, understand what this means for their sort of long-term farm business decision making, what it means for the succession planning over time as well to the next generation of farmers. And we're certainly seeing from younger farmers a real interest in this space and a lot of enthusiasm for low emissions food and fibre production, and that's really exciting to see as well. And I think also we're seeing from our supply chain globally, but also our banking system, they're taking more of an interest around natural capital in farming systems, which encapsulates the emissions part of the story, but also they see it as an opportunity to de-risking their sort of loan book, if you like. If you're a bank, you want to encourage farmers to have a good understanding of the natural capital assets in their farm business, because that goes to the sustainability of the farm, it goes to the resilience of the farm to withstand droughts and commodity price shocks and supply chain disruptions, and also goes to the emissions story as well. So I think there's lots of parts of the agri-food system in Australia and globally that is starting to show signs of I guess, momentum around low emissions food and fibre production. And there's no single point in the supply chain, and there's no single sort of role for government in this space either. But I think there's definitely a need for the system to work more closely together to reduce the number of friction points for a farm business to engage in this space, to take action and have the confidence to take some risks, because that's what ultimately it involves.
I think one of the things, you mentioned quite a number of amazing things. One thing also is you mentioned lightly around the ecosystem and nature services that livestock, especially in grazelands, and Canada, California, Australia have forest fires. And in these grazelands, there is a huge amount of work going on right now with forest fires and the integration of different types of forages, waterways, etc., to help with forest fires. Now I have a tough job of trying to wrap this up. But I think I have tried to do my best in bringing out some of the best things that all of you have shared with us. And I want to start with Paul because you gave us a lot of wisdom today. Trust a solution, cost of a solution, digital connectivity, small challenges, science that needs to be practical. Farmers want to make money, win-win situation, better, know your numbers. I thought it was fantastic. Collaboration, stacked collaboration is going to be key. Succession planning, farmers talk about succession planning. I don't know a single farmer who says, I'm not a second generation, third generation, fourth generation farmer. Farming as a business is always a family business and has always been one. And then the young generation, that they are showing a lot of interest. So that to me is a great list of takeaways for me personally. So thank you very much for being here, being part of this conversation. Thank you for staying with us for all this while. There's lots of events going on, so thanks for your time. And that's wrap it up. Thank you.